Hey guys, welcome back to INC Live and welcome to our recap of UFC 257. I've just finished watching the card. I've got my whiskey beside me. I've got my hot sauce. With that being said, let's get to the fights. And of course, there's one place we need to start, and that's our main event. Dustin Poirier knocking out Conor McGregor in the second round. The first time in his MMA career that Conor McGregor has been knocked out. And I'm one of the people asked to hold my hands up. I thought Conor McGregor was going to win this one. I thought that part of the reason he took this fight was because he saw it as an easier path to the title than, say, fighting someone like Justin Gaethje or Charles Oliveira. He severely underestimated one of two things. He underestimated how good Dustin Poirier has become since that first fight, and also how much the sport's changed since his last real fight. Like, not counting the Cowboy Cerrone fight. So Khabib in September 2018 was Conor McGregor's last fight. And what we've seen since then in mixed martial arts, we always talk about MMA being an evolving sport. And one of the big things that's changed in those sort of 18, 20 months since Conor versus Khabib is fighters utilising calf kicks. Dustin Poirier hammered that kick over and over again, and Conor McGregor had no answer for it. And once Conor's movement was gone, Dustin could tee off on the shots, and eventually it led to the fight-ending sequence. A lot of people talk about ring rust, and you get fighters like Dominic Cruz who can spend 2 or 3 years out at a time and still look like they haven't missed a beat. Conor McGregor for me is not one of those fighters, and it showed in this matchup. He looks stiff, slow, less adaptive. I don't think he could take a shot as well as what he normally does. Conor gets a lot of praise for the quality of his chin. Those shots from Dustin Poirier were hurting him, not only in the fight-ending sequence, but over and over again in that matchup. Conor did have a lot of success in the end of the first round. There was a lot of clinching in that opening exchange of the fight. But once they did separate, I think that was where Conor had his best performance. And Dustin started getting a little bit loose, which I was a bit concerned by because we know how good Conor's counter-attacking ability is. But I think once Dustin realised that Conor just didn't have that same sort of pop on his shots, he didn't favour him. And then, of course, we eventually got what happened with Conor getting teed off on. Dustin Poirier is a fantastic fighter. And he proved that again. I think a lot of people were sleeping on the quality of Dustin Poirier. Even though I picked Conor to win this fight, I thought seeing those odds going higher and higher for Conor, he was minus 330 1 point. I thought this deserves to be a lot closer than that. I would have had Conor 170, 160 at most. And if you look at Dustin Poirier's portfolio now, of the people he's beaten at lightweight, you can add Conor McGregor to a list of Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker. He has beaten some killers in that lightweight division. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's the greatest lightweight of all time, but he deserves a lot more credit. And it's good for Dustin as well to see a good guy of the sport finally getting his reward. As for Conor, I'm not going to sit here and say that Conor McGregor is now a bad fighter. I think one of the worst things you get in the MMA community is fair weather fans. People who absolutely love and adore and celebrate a fighter when they're winning, but once they lose, they were never any good to begin with. I'm not going to be one of those fans. Conor McGregor is still a very good fighter, and if he is willing to adapt and to change his style, he still can be. What we did see though last night was the end of Conor McGregor, the title-chasing fighter. He's going to go into a same mold similar to a Nate Diaz or a Jorge Masvidal or an Oscar De La Hoya in boxing. He's going to be essentially a celebrity fighter. He's going to take the big matchups that get him the highest paydays. He'll still do good box office numbers. That's not going to suffer based off this loss. But I think the days of Conor McGregor challenging for belts is over. If he does want to stick down this route and does want to try and make another run, I think maybe him versus Tony Ferguson would make a lot of sense. Ferguson's on a bit of a downslide himself. So I think it makes sense from that perspective. Because any lower than that, maybe RDA. RDA potentially because of what happened in 196 when they were supposed to be fighting. I'm favouring the third Diaz fight. I think that's the way it's going to go. In terms of what happens to Conor if he wins or loses that fight, that's for a different question. As for Dustin, personally I agree with what he said in the press conference. the lightweight belt should be vacated, or at least an interim belt should be put up for grabs. Dustin Poirier has sealed his place in that title conversation. Personally, I would go with Charles Oliveira. I don't think the UFC are going to do so for reasons we'll go into later on in this video. I don't like how Dana White is still pushing the idea of Khabib holding onto this belt, even though it's clear that Khabib doesn't have the interest in coming back. So an interim belt should be created, and Dustin Poirier should well and truly be a part of that. In terms of the rest of the card, this one really took me by surprise. Now, if you followed the preview show, and I have to be honest, this was one of the weaker ones for me in terms of my predictions. I thought that Dan Hooker would make easy work of Michael Chandler. I thought he was longer, better reach advantage. He was just going to hammer those body kicks into Chandler all the way through and eventually get the finish in the second round. What a one-shot knockout that was from Michael Chandler. And I knew that the guy had power. I sort of saw him as a Chad Mendes type where the threat of the takedown would set up those big overhands. And we'd seen it when he fought Benson Henderson just last year, that he does have that one-shot ability and capable of knocking out anyone. Doing that to Dan Hooker, who not only has great striking defense, but also as durable as they come. We saw that when he fought Dustin Poirier. To one-shot him like he did is severely impressive. For me, there were two perfect results for the UFC in terms of what would be the best result for them. The cynic in me does think that Dana dislikes the idea of fighters from Bellator being successful in the UFC. He likes the idea of their biggest names coming in and maybe not reaching their potential. We saw how he reacted when Chris lost. We saw what happened with Ben Askren. And part of me did sort of fear that he was doing the same thing to Michael Chandler, setting him up to fail. But the other positive result is what happened here. That the UFC outsider integrates himself with the fans in spectacular fashion. Knocking out Dan Hooker with one punch in the first round is well and truly the way to do it. And even though I personally think that the UFC should go with Oliveira versus Dustin Poirier, I've got a feeling they're going to throw Chandler in there. Or maybe even use Chandler as a way to try and coax Khabib. Say, hey, here's this outsider guy. You haven't faced him yet. Maybe take the fight with him. Again, I think Khabib's out of it, but so I don't see that happening, but I can see maybe Dana trying to coax Khabib back into action with that sort of incentive. Great way for Michael Chandler, and his promo as well. A lot of people don't really like the WWE style stuff, but I like fighters who get people hyped for future matchups, and Michael Chandler did that. Great addition to the lightweight roster. I'm going to be interested to see where he eventually ends up getting ranked. Personally, if it was me, I would go with him versus Gaethje. As mentioned before, I think the UFC have their aspirations for him a little bit higher. From one guy coming into the UFC and delivering, we got to talk to somebody who unfortunately didn't deliver. Now this was another one which caught me by surprise, Amanda Ribas losing in the way that she did. I did mention, sort of in passing, that Ribas maybe does have a tendency to get caught coming in. I didn't think Marina Rodriguez would be the one to do it. Marina has always been sort of a bit of a point fighter, not really having that sort of one-shot power. She caught Ribas coming in, and she was losing that fight as well. Ribas won the first round, and the first round played out the way I thought it would. Where Marina would have the advantage if the fight remained on the feet, but that Ribas' takedowns and her groundwork would get her the win. Of course, Ribas manages to land that shot. She rocks Ribas, and look, don't get me wrong, Herb Dean is a very, very good referee and is one of the gold standards. Him and Big John are sort of like the two go-to Hall of Fame referees. But he's not the referee he once was, and we saw that once again this time around. He sort of jumped in there, sort of insinuated that the fight was over, and then obviously restarted the matchup. Indecision has been a big problem with Herb during this later run of his career, and while he's still a good referee and still deserves a lot of respect, he's a step behind the top echelons of the sport. It's Jason Herzog, Mike Beltran, Mark Goddard, and then a lower tier to the likes of Herb Dean. Now, I'm not saying that Herb should retire or that he's no longer a great ref, because he is still a good ref. But I think his days on top are numbered, and again, another example of this. We've seen this too many times with Herb Dean recently. I know if Dan Hardy was watching this, he'd be going absolutely berserk. I wasn't happy with that one with Herb. But in terms of Marina, I've always considered Marina to be an underrated fighter. She's not flashy, she's not spectacular in what she does, but she was always grinding out results. And when we saw the likes of Ribas or Cynthia Calvillo getting all this adoration and praise and being talked about as future UFC champions, Marina was just clawing away there, never really getting that sort of recognition. So it's good for her that she finally gets this sort of big highlight reel win. She's going to get a lot more exposure being on the Conor McGregor card. So congratulations to her. Where she goes from this, I was mentally setting up Ribas versus Joanna in my head. I don't think Marina's going to take that fight, and I don't think it's going to be a fight that personally interests Joanna. So it's going to be intriguing to see how this sort of mixes out, because I think the UFC's plan was certainly built around Ribas taking that victory. Surprisingly, Joanne Calderwood versus Jessica Rai, much more entertaining than I expected. Not a technical masterpiece by any means, but entertaining matchup. I enjoyed it. I thought that JoJo, we saw the best and worst Joanne Calderwood in this fight. It was almost sort of emblematic of her career. At times in that second round, she looked absolutely on fire. Front kicking Jessica Rai, good work to the bodies, good knees. And you saw at times you did see a girl who was worthy of being one of the top 3 or top 4 in this division. But at times the decision making just seems to go to pot. She went for that spinning back fist, and Jessica Rai managed to get the takedown. For me, she's almost similar to sort of like a female Cowboy Cerrone. She will always perform well against lesser competition, but for whatever reason, when she reaches those sort of top 3, top 4, whether it's the pressure of the situation or just reaching a sort of talent level, she always seems to come up short. Hopefully, this is the next catalyst for her to make another step forward. All the roads seem to point towards Jessica Andrade getting the next flyweight title shot. Maybe her versus Lauren Murphy, number 1 contender match. Lauren seems to be fixated on getting that belt, getting that shot after Andrade, because she thinks that Jess or Shevchenko will make a quick turnaround. I would maybe try working towards Murphy versus Calderwood, number 1 contender matchup. Whether the girl's going to play ball, I'm not entirely sure. Jessica Rai served a purpose. Name fighter, basically used to build up someone else. Jessica Rai does get a lot of grief from fans, and I understand why. I think she's still worthy of being in the UFC, but again, she needs more to a game than just being an aggressive, dirty boxer. Brad Tavares was another guy who I thought had a very good performance. I thought his takedown defense looked absolutely fantastic up against Shoeface. Juliana Pena, she caught a lot of people by surprise. A lot of people I know picked Sarah McMahon to win that one. So good performance from her. I do like her call out, and she basically said an issue I've had with women's bantamweight for a long time. I think that division is stagnating right now. It needs an active champion, and where I don't see Pena being competitive in a title matchup, but good on her for bringing up an issue which I think a lot of people need to bring up with the women's bantamweight division, which is really struggling right now. So that's just a quick recap of everything that happened over at UFC 257, a couple of my own personal opinions. Consider this sort of like almost a bit of a vlog, rather than sort of like a critical assessment. I'm certainly not a Luke Thomas or a Brian Campbell who will do this in far better detail than what I do. I'm working to try and improve some things technically. Any sort of feedback would be appreciated. I'm looking to get myself a new webcam, looking to get myself a new microphone, so the technical issues of the sport, of the show I should say, are going to be greatly improved. With that being said, thank you very much for watching. That's some of my 2 cents over what happened to UFC 257. I'm going to be back in 2 weeks' time when I'll talk about the first UFC Apex card, where Alexander Volkov will look to try and end Alistair Overeem's winning streak. I'll have a recap of that one and the rest of the card coming up. Stay tuned to the INC. Thank you for watching.